Welcome to Cyber Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, namely me, Christina Richmond.
And me, Rory Duncan. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Hello, Christina.
Hello, Rory. I understand it's quite warm where you are.
Yeah, it's very, very melting. I went to our allotment. I was just saying at lunchtime to water. It was like the Gobi Desert. It was very, very dry. So
wow.
It's kind of unusual.
And you're usually, very unusual, because I was going to say you're usually cooler and wetter.
Yeah. It's a bit parching today. And you, how are you doing?
Yes, I'm quite well. It was, I'm sorry to say, very cool last night. So the house is nice and cool and beautiful blue sky day ahead. Very dry here as well. In fact, we have a lot of really terrible fires going on in the West. One that was suspected that it started from fireworks. So,
really?
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
And, one person died, hundreds of homes destroyed, tens of thousands of acres. I have a friend actually fighting that fire, and I am concerned for him. It's a big one.
Yeah, well.
So,
Sorry
but that's
about that.
the West in the U.S., and I know that there are fires in Europe and in the UK, and
There was actually a big fire in a building on Princess Street in Edinburgh last night. It was all over the news. Yeah, one of the old historic buildings that had been disused for a little while and had caught fire in the middle of the night. So the streets were shut. The main street was closed. The trams were shut. There was photos everywhere. The traffic was tailed back all the way along to the West End. So,
oh wow, that's
it's a
incredible.
pity. It's these old buildings, and it's just a bit of a shell, these old historic parts of Edinburgh. So we should probably kick off the show. Let's talk about the newsletter, Christina, our lovely newsletter. Shout out to new subscribers.
I haven't done the newsletter. It's Thursday. I'm going to be late again. Last week I was oddly early. But I'll be late today.
Well, that's okay. If you're a day early last week, then you've got one in the bank, so to speak, so you can be a day late this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
It'll come out today. It is, folks, it is meant to come out on Thursdays. And the reason I say I'm late is because we were scheduling it for 10 a.m. on Thursdays, which for most humans would mean you'd prepare the day ahead. For me, it means I'm scrambling at 7 in the morning. But anyway, it will come out today, later.
So, folks, if you haven't signed up already, you can do so for free at richmondadvisorygroup.com, and we'll keep you in the loop about what's happening in the cybersecurity sector. And what have we got on the show this week, Christina? A couple of news items.
Yes, you picked a couple of doozies. And what I was thinking about this morning, when I read through the Jade Puffer story, the first automated database extortion by agents, when I read through that, and then I read through the story about Palo Alto, the newly acquired Koi Security, having published a risk report identifying several IOCs, one of which was Meeting TV. So when I read through those two stories, those are the stories we'll talk about today, folks. But when I read through them, it seemed to me like we had the attack on the one side, so the offense, the attack by agents on the Jade Puffer side of the news, and then we have the defense and how we're trying to defend with LLMs and AI. So we've got the whole spectrum on the news today. It'll be really interesting to kind of talk through each of those stories. Rory, thanks for pulling those.
Yeah, no, great. And we've got a great guest this week. We have Heath Renfrew, who's the co-founder of Fenix24. And we had a chat with Fenix24 when we were at RSAC earlier this year, didn't we?
We did. And what's fascinating here, having studied the incident response market, having studied the proactive side of boom, how you prepare for the incident, and also studying, what happens during the response, they are slightly different. Fenix24 is about recovery. So the real cleanup, not just getting the attacker out of your systems, but then how do you bring your systems back to full function? Where is your data? How do you make sure that your data is back in place and available if you did have it archived? What if you didn't have it archived? How do you clean up in that situation? So I think it's going to be a great chat with Heath.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Let's do the news then, Christina. Would you like to do the first one, or shall I do it?
Well, I want to just chat about it for a minute because, yes, I want to do it. So please, thank you. This is fascinating. And we've reached out to Sysdig because they are the company that discovered Jade Puffer and named it Jade Puffer. Michael Clark, who is the Senior Director of Threat Research at Sysdig, wrote a blog on this. So we've reached out to Sysdig and asked them if they could see if Michael would be willing to come on the show, hopefully next week, if it works out. So Jade Puffer, agentic ransomware for automated database extortion.
Oh dear.
That is a mouthful.
And it doesn't sound good.
Well, no. So this operator, which Michael says they've dubbed Jade Puffer, gained initial access to an internet-facing Langflow instance. Now, Langflow is a popular open source framework for building LLM-driven applications and agent workflows, right? So it went into the Langflow instance through a CVE numbered 2025-3248. And that CVE is a missing authentication flaw in the Langflow code validation endpoint that allows an unauthenticated attacker to execute arbitrary Python on the host. So it ran this adaptively and fully automatedly through this open source framework, right? And it created this attack. So they're calling it the Agentic Threat Actor, or ATA. That's what Jade Puffer is. And the operator, Jade Puffer, is delivered solely by an AI agent rather than a human-driven toolkit. My God.
I know. It was scary when I was looking into this, the fact that we got a few things, the issue or the type of threat actor, this agentic threat actor, an ATA, which presumably we'll hear a lot more about, but I think it's worth delving into that at a later date. And also the fact that what it was doing, it wasn't just following a script, it was then adapting in real time.
It was self-narrating as they do.
Exactly. Retrying failed steps within these refined parameters. So it's the kind of scary sequence that's one that Sysdig found, but I guarantee there's going to be a whole host of others coming out, right?
So what freaked me out is that it was using natural language reasoning. It was doing target prioritization. It was doing the detailed annotations, right, that is very LLM-ish, right? I will now try this, and let me go to this database, and let me try this. And what really freaked me out is as it adapted in real time, retrying these failed steps, right, over and over again, it went from a failed login to a working fix in 31 seconds, Rory.
Yeah. Holy crap. Basically, that's what I put in the notes. Holy crap. That's really only, scratching the surface, folks. The blog, we'll put the blog link in the show notes. But Michael, and hopefully he'll come on at some point in the future. That'd be great to chat with him. But he then goes through it all in great detail. If you've got a bit stronger knowledge of how these things work, you can follow on exactly how they analyzed it and where it went in and how they replicated it. So that's definitely one to take a look at, folks.
Well, and I proposed to you, Rory, this morning that instead of the API special episode, we do these market episodes once a quarter. We did identity last time. We've done MDR and we've done threat hunting, GRC, and we were going to talk about API, and we might still next week, folks, but this is so timely these agentic threat actors, or ATAs. So if Michael can come on, I think a special episode on ATAs would be really interesting. What do you think, Rory?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We have another story, Christina, and to your point about going from kind of one side of the fence to the other side, and this is to do, and it's an ongoing litigation. So this is as reported in the Register, which is a startup company, a company called Meeting TV, who are a San Diego-based online video conferencing and webinar startup, are suing Palo Alto Networks recently acquired.
That's a David and Goliath story.
Oh, yeah, it's a David and Goliath story. Thank you.
Yep.
They're suing Palo Alto Networks Koi Security, the acquisition of which was finalized earlier this year, saying a AI hallucinated report falsely linked it to Chinese sabotage. Now, my take on this is it's a really good example of, with great power comes great responsibility. If you're going to produce a report and you are from a well-known market-leading company, you have to be careful what you publish. So basically, what happened was that the legal complaint details that Palo Alto Networks alleges that Koi used an LLM to generate the threat report, and its LLM, it's called its Wings product. The product by Koi is called Wings, and they describe it as an LLM-first risk engine that looks under the hood of all endpoint software, etc., etc. It provides all the critical risk data a security, IT, GRC, or SOC team will ever need. Now, I'm drawing attention to this LLM first risk engine, right? Because this seems to be where it happened. And basically, it appears that it hallucinated its findings. What Koi allegedly has done has falsely accused Meeting TV Inc. of criminal conduct, including operating core infrastructure for a well-funded Chinese criminal organization.
Wow.
So not that they are actually creating a malware or something like that, but they were responsible for providing the infrastructure. And it seems to be...
Right, and that was in the court documents, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So you said with great power comes great responsibility, and a large, provider, a large company like Palo Alto is the one with the great power and the great responsibility. But we have to remember that Koi Security was the one that used this LLM first risk engine that hallucinated, and it was prior to being acquired by Palo Alto. And so they were a startup themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, unfortunately, through the acquisition, Palo has kind of inherited that. But I think the question was, well, what actually happened to Meeting TV? Well, what happened as a result of this report being issued? Security companies and service providers around the globe blocked their domains and services, so labeling it as malware and command and control infrastructure, which means that they kind of disappeared. They were blocked. People couldn't get
and it
to
shut
the
down their business. And being a startup, it really hurt their business.
Yeah.
What is Palo saying about this, Rory?
Well, they're really kind of giving a fairly standard response. They have said, we believe Koi's cybersecurity research reflects its commitment to identifying and exposing threats to users and enterprises, and we expect that this dispute will be resolved through the appropriate legal process.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, so which, if you're a legal team in this situation, is the correct response to give.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and so, I just thought it was really interesting that our first story was talking about using LLMs to automate a database intrusion. And the second story is about using LLMs to identify risks in an automated fashion. And the first one, the attack, was quite successful. The second one hallucinated. So the defense hallucinated. So we have to really fine-tune our defenses in this machine-to-machine world. And this was a scary one. I think we'll see more attacks, but we'll also see more mistaken defense, I think, as well.
Unfortunately, it seems as if mistaken attacks don't result in anything apart from lack of success, but mistaken defense can be business critical
Yeah, cautionary tale, and the word to the wise is, keep the human in the loop on the defensive side.
Indeed. Our special guest today is Heath Renfrew, who is the co-founder of Fenix24. Hey Heath, how are you doing? Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for bearing with me as I get the intro right. I'm not coughing or spluttering or getting your name wrong. So welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. So Christina, usually you're asking the first question, and this week is no different from other weeks. So what would we like to ask Heath about?
First, I have a surprise question, which is, I like the cowboy hat, the Texas hat, Heath. Tell us a little bit about Spring Branch, Texas, and then we'll get to our softball question.
The hill country area of Texas is probably the prettiest area of Texas by far. So I grew up in this area, and then I left for a long time with the Navy, and then came back and settled back in here. So lakes, rivers, country life, woods, and then you're not too far from San Antonio and Austin if you need to go into the city. But that's the lifestyle we get to live out here. So I enjoy it.
Well, that's wonderful. It reminds me of a friend of mine who always wears his cowboy hat everywhere he goes. And so it's a good picture of you on LinkedIn. And we appreciate you joining us from Spring Branch today. So as I mentioned, just a softball, easy question. What keeps you up at night, Heath?
Wow. Well, I'm not a practitioner anymore, so I'm not worried about threat actors because that's all I do every single day is to face these threat actors. I suppose being an entrepreneur, keeps you up at night is to make sure the business is growing and that your employees are going to be well taken care of and that they're happy.
Oh, I love that. First of all, you didn't go to the A word, which so many people jump to right away. And I love that you're putting your employees first, making sure that your company is doing well, that your employees are happy and engaged and taken care of because you're doing really important work. So I was, mentioning earlier in the show that I've done a lot of study around incident response, but what Fenix24 does is specific to recovery. Tell us in your words, Heath, what recovery means. So you're already in the boom. You're not right of boom. You're actually really in boom. And now you're coming out of boom to the recovery. What does that look like?
Well, you're still in the boom when recovery starts, is what I try to explain to folks. So we'll focus on ransomware. That's the primary thing that we rebuild. We do a lot of other things, nation-state flush outs, sophisticated threat actors like Scattered Spider. That was very prominent, obviously, for a long time, and flush them out when they've been proactively. Recovery is simple. The way I describe a ransomware attack, it's your IT organizations have an infrastructure, and it's like a Ferrari. They drive it, they put gas in it, they keep it clean, and it runs well. And now you have somebody that's coming and taking it, nuts, bolts, engine parts, windows, hubcaps, everything you're taking apart and throwing back in front of you and saying, put it back together again. And clients struggle. It doesn't really matter the size of it. In the majority, about 85% of our cases, I've done over 2,200 ransomware attacks that I've been a part of. 85% of those backups aren't there. They're gone. And that baffles people in the sense that, well, what do you mean they're gone? Well, you have a human being that's physically going to go through your environment and try to find your backups because they want to get paid. They want you to buy a decryption tool. So they want to go find the backups and destroy them. But something else that's never taken into account in incident response, and I used to be a practitioner, I run multiple massive global cybersecurity programs with the Department of Defense. You don't take into account in tabletop exercises, no domain controllers, no Active Directory, your backups are gone, you've had a threat actor in there, everything's encrypted, you have to lock everything down, you have to do data forensics and understand indicators of compromise, and then you got to try to figure out how to put Humpty Dumpty back together at the same time. It is complex, it is difficult, and these threat actors don't just encrypt your domain controllers. They don't just take out Active Directory. They lock you out of your ESXi host or your Hyper-V. They'll destroy your backups. They might take over the firewalls. It is painful. It's like a marathon is the best way I can describe it. So that's what we historically walk in with clients. We're brought in at the same time that the data forensics firms are coming in because you can do both at the same time. And it's just trying to find the path to being able to help them recover. We've done probably 98% of the events that we've done across the globe in 196 different countries. We've done restoration. We've done it remotely. We'll get on a jump box. We'll get in there. And we're able to find a domain controller, even if it's encrypted. You can still replicate it, which is key, right? You want that domain controller to be there because that's the brain of the IT infrastructure. And once you have the brain functioning, then you can start really trying to find out how bad the damage is. Are the backups there? You have to try to get Active Directory back up and operational again. You make sure your firewalls are logged. And at the same time, you're trying to do a whole bunch of forensics and get the forensic data to the forensic firm. So that's kind of usually within the first 24 to 48 hours of a ransomware attack, because that's what you're trying to sit there and figure out. You want to just figure all this out, because if you don't have backups, you're going to start negotiating with the threat actor most likely, because you're going to have to probably decrypt the data. And a lot of clients that do have backups that do survive, they still have to negotiate to get a decryptor tool, because backups today and historically are developed for a natural disaster or a data center going down. They're not being executed the way that clients really think they're being executed. I've not yet had one client that actually had complete clean and backups that they could actually fully recover from. They might have 60% of the data or 40% of the data, or things hadn't been backed up for a year and they didn't realize it, because backups are an afterthought. There's an assumption they'll be there, and historically they're not. So that's the big challenge we have. And if you've seen a major cyber incident in the news over the last 4 years, doesn't really matter where the globe it is, we've probably done restoration for it.
Talking about that side of things, I don't know if you remember back in 2021, the one of the data centers of OVH Cloud in Strasbourg basically melted. There was a fire and the thing was completely destroyed. One of the things that came out of that was the relatively high number of customers and companies that didn't really have a robust backup strategy. How do you think things have changed since you started the firm? Then versus now? Do you think clients generally are more aware of that? Are they more responsible and more savvy about doing backups?
No, that's my answer. No. I'll explain it to you this way. I think the world is starting to focus on resiliency, and we've been preaching that. I've been preaching that. I think resiliency is the number one security control. Backups and asset management should be your number one controls, because you can guarantee those. You can guarantee you can recover. You can guarantee real RTOs in a disaster situation. The RTOs that are in anybody that's listening to this podcast right now and your disaster recovery plans are wrong. They're just not realistic. You're not going to recover in 24 hours. You're not going to recover in 48 hours. There's many reasons for that. People don't take into account the pipeline it takes to move data back across to be able to recover. Do you have enough storage capacity to be able to recover? Imagine 80% of your environment is probably going to be encrypted. You can't delete the data. You need it from forensically, and you're probably going to have to get a decryption tool. So now you have 20% of your data to recover into and build back into. And then if you do get a decryption tool, you're going to have to copy the data you want to decrypt and put it into a sandbox environment to see how good the decryptor tool is, which historically, not great, right? So there's a lot of things that go into recovery. Nobody's backing up correctly. First off, you have vendors out there claiming to be immutable, and technically they're not. My definition of immutability is it is 30 days. You cannot alter, delete, or do anything with that data, but yet it does not come out of the box that way. It has to be configured to do that. But immutable data does not mean recoverability in a ransomware attack. What I find is clients have a copy here, maybe they do a tape backup here, maybe they have it in Azure, but then they've connected everything to Active Directory, and then once the threat actor is in there, they just go from Active Directory to all the backups. Right? And we do a lot of proactive work too. It's not just the restoration side. We have a resiliency intelligence assessment that we do, where we're actually hands-on keyboard looking at the configurations of the data of these clients' environments, from Fortune 500 to Fortune 100 to Fortune 12. They're all in a bad situation when it comes to being able to recover.
That's kind of scary to hear, but also perhaps reassuring for those who feel that, well, they're the only ones who aren't doing this. If this is the case across all different sizes and industries, then that's a challenge. Given the, and I'll use the AI word now, so given that AI has come along where, agents are there, huge numbers of additional attacks, huge number of tools that are being used as defense, is this kind of multiplying the threat of potential failure, or is it reducing the chance of having successful resilience? What's your view?
Resistance is eventually futile. That's what I tell everybody. That's
Right.
just the truth, and I've seen every organization. But resiliency can be orchestrated and done correctly, but you have to put the effort and the money into it to be able to actually do that. And what I tell is, I was like, stop doing your paper tabletop exercises and stop doing your transfer of a couple of applications back into your environment when you actually have an active domain controller and an active directory. You really have to plan for the worst. And then you got to stop assuming that your return to operations, your RTOs, are real, because those RTOs are going to shift constantly, right? Mm-hmm. You might have 85 terabytes of data for one critical system. Depending on the computing power of your backup solution or storage solution, to move back on-prem, that could take 4 days to move that data. You just don't know until you really test it. I'm going to give you some horror stories. First question is, how many endpoints do you have? How many clients do you think I ever actually truly know how many endpoints they have? None.
Yeah. How many clients know what their asset inventory really is?
That's where I was going to now. Asset inventory is right up there with backups as far as control. So we have to first figure out, okay, we need to find out your endpoints. How much EDR saturation do you have? And they might have 80% of the EDR saturation. I was like, so that's the reason I say resistance is eventually futile, because if you leave one asset unprotected from EDR, then okay, that's a pivot point. When we look at backup recovery, we have to sit down with these clients, and not just IT. I love the IT folks, but listen, they're not the business owners. Their decisions on what's most critical to recover is not going to match up to the rest of the business. Mm-hmm. We have to sit them down and go, tell me your most critical systems, right? Then you got to match the tier 0 systems for those critical systems. And then I got to go find all the dependencies to that critical system that make it function. There might be 140 other servers that filled into a critical application for a client that you're going to have to rebuild. Well, how do you do that? Well, one of the reasons we created Argos 99, our software, and we've been using IR for a long time, is mapping dependencies to critical applications, because that's when your true RTOs come into play. So it's a challenge out there. And everybody just assumes their backups are going to be they're going to recover. And resiliency needs to be the number one focus, because you can orchestrate it and guarantee that you can recover. And we'll just see that will really help clients. Business interruption is the biggest financial loss for these clients in a ransomware attack. And you're probably going, oh, they have cyber insurance. I've had one client out of 2,200 clients that had enough cyber insurance business interruption coverage to cover their losses. On average, no matter the size of the client, most clients' cyber business interruption part. So your cyber policy is separated in two different sides. One pays for the ransom if they need to pay it. They pay for the data forensic firm, the lawyers, all that other stuff. And then you have this little BI portion, the business interruption portion, that comes with the policy that most people don't look at. Most of that money runs out within 2 days of a ransomware attack.
Right.
And then they're completely out of pocket for all the business interruption that they're going to be going through. Jaguar's prime example. I mean, it affected 3% of the gross domestic product for that country. Though they didn't have cyber insurance, just to give you an indication of how devastating ransomware can be for an organization like that. It wasn't just Jaguar that struggled. There were 5,500 supply chain individuals underneath that provided data, and they severely struggled. Change Healthcare was another major one when you look at it and the impact that had pharmacies shutting down. You had nursing homes shutting down that weren't able to do their job because they couldn't make money, because they couldn't bill and weren't able to get the things they needed to get done. So the impact is tremendous, and recoverability, I think, is coming. People are starting looking at resiliency, but they're not looking at it through the lens of, okay, this is a true disaster. We need to truly plan for the worst.
I wanted to pivot slightly, and because you opened the show saying, look, you're no longer a practitioner, you're focused on running the business and looking after people and so on. What do you think has changed over the years? Imagine if you're to start a new business, start a new cybersecurity business, if this was your founding a few months, what do you think is different now? What are the challenges now? And the reason I ask is because a lot of what we talk about is the kind of educative, instructive side. People want to understand where the opportunities are, and where should young people study, or what kind of jobs they should get. So as a founder, where would you start if you were to start again?
Well, I would tell anybody that's out there, I think we made a mistake, and I made a mistake. I started in the IT industry aside of the house for the United States Navy a long, long time ago. And then somewhere I decided I want to go down security, and we pivoted. And what I've learned after being in the incident response side of the world is us security professionals have no knowledge of IT engineering anymore. Right. And that is where the gaps are. That's where the security lacks. What we see with threat actors that makes us a little bit unique is that we can see these threat actors pivoting through the IT infrastructure. It's not a security issue. It's an IT engineer issue, if you understand what I'm saying. The CrowdStrikes aren't going to see how these engineers are connecting the dots to be able to make their job a little easier to move laterally. So security professionals, IT professionals, they need to know each other's job a lot better and understand that. And that's the direction I would go. If I was coming into today's world and trying to start a company specifically, it would still be very much focused on, building robust resiliency across an organization, helping clients really try to, drive towards recoverability. I think the age of security software as a product as its own being investable I think it's gone. In fact, I think there's been a couple of private equity firms that have written a couple of reports saying they will no longer solely invest into a cybersecurity product by itself. It's going to have humans and managed services associated with it. So
you've said so many different things here, Heath. It's really been so interesting to listen to. First, the problem that you laid out. And then the solution here, this resiliency solution, in an age of machine-to-machine cyber warfare, if you will, right? So if we're looking at resiliency in this new machine-to-machine era, Heath, you've brought up such great points about resiliency and insurance and making sure that you have your backup and recovery really fully in place, that the young generation needs to look at IT engineering as well as security. But in this machine-to-machine era, is there anything else that we need to be looking at to be on top of that?
That's a good question. I'm trying to sit here and think about that.
I mean, it's a hard one because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely a very, we've even gone to another level. Like, we created the resiliency operations center. We're monitoring, the backup status and the resiliency of an organization 24/7. That was our pivot, to really focus on really putting like a SOC capability, but a managed detection and response and resiliency operations center focused on, hey, your backups aren't executing, the policies are changed, because we're so concerned that the wall, the defense in depth is going to get busted through that side of the house. But listen, we're even trying to figure out who's tracking all these agents that are inside in organizations right now. They're going to have administrator accounts, possibly. They're going to have access. So who's tracking from an ID perspective? Still to this day, 80% of cyber attacks are due to weak identification issues and being able to move laterally through the environment. But now you have 2,000 agents running through a client's environment that have power to do things, and they're going to have their own logins and capabilities. And how do you track those? That's another asset that needs to be tracked, right? That's a rogue asset that can be taken advantage and taken over by a client, or even another AI product coming in and taking it over. So those are the things that I'm out here trying to figure out. I guess I said AI didn't keep me up at night, but it might keep me up at night now since you asked that question. So I appreciate that. So
yeah, that's great. Interesting insights. I'm mulling it over as you're speaking, Heath, and many of these we've talked about in the show and we'll probably continue to talk about. It was great to get your perspective, given your role as a founder, but then your perspective over the many years. So we'd like to thank you for coming on. Appreciate your time. And we look forward to have you back on the show again in the future at some point if you're
Yeah, thank you so much, Heath. It was just great having you on. It was really interesting to hear about resiliency. It's something that I agree with you 100% we need to be focused on. So thanks again.
Well, thank you all. Glad to come back anytime. I enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks, Heath. Yeah, another great discussion, this time with Heath. Christina, that was
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I love a good resiliency conversation, and he hit all the points.
He did.
He did. I mean, it's not one thing. It's not just getting cyber insurance. It's not just having good backups. There's so many pieces and parts to it. Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation.
And obviously he's got a great perspective over many years. It's slightly different to perhaps some of our guests who are, right in amongst it, right at that point. He had more of a kind of a step back. It was also a bit scary to hear his perspective of, has anything changed in terms of good, effective backup strategies? The answer was an emphatic no, actually, not much has changed. So that was a little scary.
Quite emphatic, several
quite emphatic.
Times. And I agree. I mean, from my time in storage to my time through being an analyst at IDC, looking at incident, not recovery as much as response, but seeing the recovery side quite often, it hasn't changed enough. It's kind of how we harp on hygiene, Rory. We have to harp on backup and recovery. We really have to harp on setting up your systems for the very worst case scenario, as he was saying.
Well, talking about harping on, we've probably done enough of that for this week, I would say.
Okay.
As a segue into the outro. Next week, well, we're not entirely sure yet. Next week, we potentially have planned another special episode next week looking at the API security market, as we've done with some of the other markets, but perhaps we may have Michael Clark from Sysdig on, hopefully, fingers crossed. Maybe he's listening to this, maybe he's not, but either way, I know he reached out. Let's just see what happens, but then we can talk more about the Jade Puffer incident and agentic threat actors. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd really like to talk about ATA, the agentic threat actors, if we can. But we'll see. So stay tuned for a surprise market overview and possible guest next week, or the API security market. One or the other. One or the other.
So, and if you'd like to get in touch in the meantime, you can do so. Probably the easiest way is by email, and that's at me, which is Rory at richmondadvisorygroup.com.
Yeah, or me, Christina Richmond, and that is Christina at richmondadvisorygroup.com, or you can reach out through info at richmondadvisorygroup.com.
Great, thank you for that. So thanks for joining us this week. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to you tuning in again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.